There is a truth that settles in the bones of those who have suffered injustice, a knowing that lives in the marrow and cannot be extracted by apology or time or even vindication. It is the knowledge that the world can turn against you in an instant, that the people you trust most can become your executioners, that a single lie can erase years of loyalty and love, leaving you standing in ruins while everyone else goes on with their lives as if your destruction was necessary, justified, perhaps even deserved. I am telling you about Miriam John, a woman whose hands had scrubbed floors and raised children and cooked meals and held together a family that was not even hers by blood, only to have those same hands accused of theft, only to watch the family she had served for 15 years cast her out without hesitation, without investigation, without mercy. This story happened in our city, in our time, among people who go to church on Sundays and donate to charity and consider themselves good, moral, upstanding citizens. There was no mystery here, no complicated conspiracy, just the simple, brutal mathematics of class and power, the way wealth protects itself by sacrificing the vulnerable, the way families close ranks against outsiders even when the outsider has been more family than the blood relatives themselves. Pay attention to how quickly love becomes suspicion, how easily trust transforms into accusation, how thoroughly a life can be dismantled by people who never bothered to ask if the destruction they were causing might be based on lies. This is a story about Miriam, yes, but it is also a story about the Hartwell family who destroyed her, and about what happened when the wheel of consequence finally, inevitably, came around. Miriam John arrived in America at 23 years old with a nursing degree from the Philippines that meant nothing in her new country, with $200 in her pocket and an address for a cousin in Queens who had promised to help her find work. She was small and soft-spoken, with gentle eyes that seemed to apologize for taking up space, with hands that were always moving, always working, unable to rest even when rest was permitted. She had left behind her parents and 3 younger siblings, a family trapped in poverty that stretched back generations, working-class people who had never had enough of anything except children and hope and the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from laboring endlessly without ever getting ahead. Miriam had been the smart one, the one who got scholarships and went to university, the one who was supposed to lift the family out of poverty through education and opportunity. But the Philippines had too many nurses and not enough jobs. And America, she had been told, America needed workers. America paid wages that could support an entire family back home. America was where you went when you wanted to transform your life and the lives of everyone connected to you. So Miriam came, carrying all her family's dreams in a worn suitcase, believing in America the way her mother believed in God, with absolute faith that could not be shaken by evidence or experience or the grinding reality that would soon enough reveal itself. The cousin in Queens found Miriam work as a home health aide, caring for elderly patients who needed help with daily tasks, basic medical monitoring, companionship in their final years or months or weeks. The work was hard and the pay was terrible, barely above minimum wage, and Miriam worked 12-hour shifts that left her body aching and her spirit depleted, but she sent money home every month without fail. Money that paid for her youngest brother's schooling, for medicine for her father's diabetes, for the 1,000 small emergencies that constitute poverty in a developing nation. She lived in a tiny room she shared with 2 other Filipino women in a neighborhood where English was the 4th or 5th most common language, where the American dream looked nothing like the movies had promised, where survival required constant hustle and sacrifice, and the suppression of any dream beyond making it through another day and sending another money order home. Miriam dated occasionally, quiet dinners with quiet men who worked construction or drove delivery trucks or cleaned office buildings at night, men who were also sending money home, who were also living minimal lives so others could live slightly less minimal lives, who were also caught in the machinery of global economics that required some people to be squeezed so others could be comfortable. Nothing ever developed from these dates. No relationship that could sustain itself against the weight of obligation and exhaustion and the simple fact that romantic love required energy and hope that people like Miriam and her suitors had already allocated elsewhere. Miriam was 31 years old when she answered an advertisement for a live-in nanny and housekeeping position with the Hartwell family in Westchester, a wealthy suburb north of the city where houses had yards and multiple cars, and the kind of quiet that came from distance and money and gates that kept out anything that might disturb the peace. The position offered room and board plus a salary that was nearly double what she had been making, and Miriam interviewed with Catherine Hartwell on a Saturday afternoon in spring, sitting in a kitchen that was larger than the entire apartment Miriam shared with her roommates, answering questions about her experience and references and availability. Catherine was 42, blonde and athletic, with the kind of beauty that came from good genes maintained by expensive interventions, manicures and highlights and personal training sessions that kept her body trim despite birthing 3 children. She was not unkind during the interview, not warm exactly, but professional, assessing Miriam the way one might assess a car or appliance, checking functionality, reliability, suitability for purpose. The Hartwells needed help, Catherine explained. Her husband, Richard, worked long hours as a corporate attorney. Herself, she was involved in charity work and social obligations. They had 3 children who needed supervision and care, and their previous nanny had recently left to return to her home country. The job would require living in the house 6 days a week, caring for the children, managing household tasks, including cooking and cleaning, and laundry, being available as needed with occasional evening or weekend hours when the family had social obligations. In exchange, Miriam would have a private room, meals provided, health insurance after 6 months, and the salary they had advertised. Miriam took the job without negotiating, without asking for more money or better terms, simply grateful for the opportunity, for the chance to send more money home, for the promise of stability after years of precarious employment where every shift depended on a patient's continued illness or life, where work could disappear without warning, leaving you scrambling to find the next position. She moved into the Hartwell house on a Monday, carrying her few belongings in the same worn suitcase she had brought from the Philippines 8 years earlier, and Catherine showed her to a small room on the 3rd floor, formerly a storage space with a twin bed and small dresser and window that looked out over the backyard. It was the nicest room Miriam had ever had to herself, and she stood there after Catherine left, looking at the clean walls and the made bed and the privacy, and she felt something like happiness, or at least the relief that comes from finding solid ground after years of unstable footing. The children were Emma, 13, Jacob, 10, and Sophie, 6, and they regarded Miriam with the casual indifference of children who had always had help, who did not distinguish between the various adults paid to care for them, who saw Miriam not as a person, but as a function, someone who existed to serve their needs and would be replaced if she failed to do so adequately. The work was constant and exhausting, but Miriam did not complain, could not afford to complain, needed this job too desperately to risk it with anything that might be perceived as attitude or unwillingness. She woke at 6 a.m. to prepare breakfast, got the children ready for school, drove them in the family's SUV even though the school was walkable because Catherine did not want them arriving sweaty or tired, returned to clean the house from top to bottom, did laundry that seemed to multiply impossibly, prepared dinner according to Catherine's detailed instructions and dietary restrictions, helped with homework, supervised baths, read bedtime stories to Sophie, who was young enough to still want them, and finally collapsed into her 3rd floor room near 10 o'clock each night, too tired even to call home, though she tried at least weekly to speak with her family, to hear her mother's voice, to know that all the sacrifice was worth something, was supporting people she loved, even if she rarely saw them. The Hartwells were not cool, exactly, but they were demanding in the way wealthy people often are, accustomed to service, expecting perfection, quick to point out any failure or oversight, but rarely acknowledging when things went well, operating under the assumption that adequate performance was the baseline expectation and required no comment or appreciation. Catherine left detailed lists each morning, instructions for the day's tasks, appointments to remember, errands to run, meals to prepare. Always more than could comfortably be accomplished, but somehow Miriam managed, moving through the house like a ghost, efficient and invisible, present when needed and absent when not, learning the family's rhythms and preferences and unspoken rules. Richard Hartwell was a presence more than a person in Miriam's daily life. A tall man in expensive suits, who left early and returned late, who barely acknowledged her existence except to occasionally compliment her cooking or ask if she had seen his briefcase or keys, who related to his children through questions about grades and sports and college preparation, even though the oldest was only 13. He was not unkind, but he was absent, checked out, his attention always on his phone or laptop, his mind always somewhere else. And Miriam understood that his role in the family was primarily financial, providing the money that made this life possible, while the actual living of it was delegated to Catherine and, by extension, to Miriam herself. Catherine filled her days with activities that looked like work, but were actually the performance of leisure dressed as obligation. Charity committee meetings, lunch with friends who were organizing fundraisers, yoga classes, shopping trips framed as necessary errands, coffee dates to plan school events. She was busy constantly, but producing nothing tangible. Her labor invisible the way women's labor often is, maintaining the social connections and domestic organization that allowed Richard to focus on his career and the children to focus on their activities. But unlike Miriam's invisible labor, Catherine's came with status and power, with the title of wife and mother, with joint ownership of everything the family possessed, including the house and cars and investments and future security. The first year passed without incident, Miriam settling into her role, becoming part of the household's machinery, essential but unnoticed, like plumbing or electricity, something you only thought about when it failed. She learned that Emma was anxious and perfectionistic, prone to meltdowns over grades or social drama, requiring careful handling and constant reassurance. She learned that Jacob was angry about something he could not articulate, acting out through defiance and occasional physical aggression toward his sisters, requiring firm boundaries and patience that Catherine seemed unable or unwilling to provide. She learned that Sophie was sweet but needy, starving for attention from parents who were always distracted, clinging to Miriam in ways that felt both burdensome and heartbreaking, calling her Auntie Miriam, asking her to play games and tell stories, and simply be present in ways the child's actual parents rarely were. Miriam came to love these children despite herself, despite knowing they were not hers, despite understanding that her role in their lives was temporary and transactional. But she could not help it. She had always been someone who gave her whole heart to whatever task was before her, and caring for children engaged every maternal instinct she possessed, activated longings for the family she would probably never have, for the children she could not afford to bear, for the normal life that her obligations and circumstances had made impossible. She sent more money home now, able to save little, but knowing her increased income was supporting her siblings through school, helping her parents with medical expenses, keeping the family afloat in ways that made every exhausting day worthwhile, every slight or dismissal tolerable, every moment of loneliness or exhaustion bearable. Her mother's voice on their weekly phone calls radiated gratitude and pride, telling Miriam how her sacrifice was changing everything, how her brother was excelling in engineering school because of the tuition money Miriam sent, how her sister was able to continue her education instead of dropping out to work, how her parents could afford medications that kept them functional, kept them alive, how the entire extended family knew that Miriam was the one making it all possible, the dutiful daughter, the family's salvation, their bridge to a better future. These calls sustained Miriam through the hardest moments, reminded her why she endured, why she accepted treatment that sometimes bordered on contempt, why she swallowed pride and submitted to authority and allowed herself to be erased as a person so she could function as a servant, as help, as the hired hands that made other people's comfortable lives possible. The Hartwell's wealth increased visibly over the years Miriam worked for them. Richard making partner at his firm, bonuses arriving that funded renovations and vacations and private school tuition, and a beach house in the Hamptons where the family spent weekends in summer, leaving Miriam alone in the main house to deep clean and organize and prepare for their return. Catherine's jewelry became more elaborate, her clothes more expensive, her car upgraded from a luxury SUV to something even more absurdly oversized and powerful. And through it all, the family seemed unaware of how their expanding wealth contrasted with Miriam's static circumstances. How she wore the same few outfits year after year, how her shoes were worn and her phone was ancient, and her single day off was spent doing laundry and errands and collapsing in exhausted sleep,
rather than anything that might constitute actual rest or recreation. They were not consciously cruel about this disparity, simply oblivious, operating in a different economic universe where the people who served them were not quite real, not quite human in the same way they themselves were human, more like useful appliances that happened to speak and require payment. Miriam understood this dynamic, had seen it in every wealthy household she had worked in, had learned not to take it personally even though it was deeply personal, had learned to protect her dignity by maintaining internal boundaries, by knowing who she was, regardless of how others saw her, by finding her worth in her family's gratitude and her own character rather than in the recognition or respect of her employers. In her 5th year with the Hartwells, Catherine's mother died after a brief illness, and Catherine inherited a substantial sum of money, several $100,000, along with jewelry that had been in the family for generations, valuable pieces that Catherine kept in a safe in the master bedroom, taking them out occasionally for important social events, wearing emerald earrings or diamond bracelets, or the sapphire necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Miriam knew about this jewelry because she cleaned the bedroom, had seen Catherine open the safe, had heard Catherine talk on the phone with her sister about dividing their mother's estate, about appraisals and insurance, and which pieces meant most to them emotionally versus financially. The safe itself was not particularly secure, a small fireproof box with a digital code that Miriam had accidentally seen Catherine enter once, though Miriam immediately looked away, wanting no knowledge that might later be used against her, understanding instinctively that information could be dangerous for someone in her position, that knowing things created vulnerability, created the possibility of accusation. She never touched the jewelry, never even looked at it closely, approaching the master bedroom with the cautious respect of someone who understood boundaries, who knew that some spaces were sacred not because they were inherently special, but because they belonged to people with power, and power protected itself by punishing those who transgressed, even accidentally, even innocently. The accusation came on an ordinary Tuesday in October, Miriam having worked for the Hartwells for nearly 6 years, autumn sunlight filtering through windows she had cleaned that morning, the house quiet with children at school and Catherine out at one of her committee meetings. Miriam was in the kitchen preparing dinner, cutting vegetables for the organic, locally sourced meal Catherine had planned, when she heard the front door open and Catherine's voice, high and agitated, calling her name. Miriam wiped her hands and went to the foyer, finding Catherine standing there with Richard beside her, both of them looking serious, angry. Their faces set in expressions Miriam had never seen directed at her before. "We need to talk to you about something," Catherine said, her voice cold, and Miriam felt her stomach drop, felt fear flood her system, though she did not yet know why, sensing only that something had shifted, something had broken, something was terribly wrong. They led her to the living room, a formal space Miriam rarely entered except to clean, and Catherine gestured for her to sit in a chair while she and Richard remained standing, positioning creating the dynamic, the power relationship made physical and undeniable. "My grandmother's sapphire necklace is missing," Catherine said without preamble, her voice hard. "It was in the safe last month, and now it's gone. You're the only person besides Richard and me who has access to our bedroom, who cleans in there regularly. So I need you to tell me what happened to it." Miriam felt the words impact, like physical blows, felt the floor tilt beneath her, felt panic and confusion, and the immediate instinct to defend herself, warring with the paralysis that came from shock. "I didn't take anything," she managed to say, her voice small, her accent suddenly thick the way it always became when she was stressed or frightened. "I would never take anything, Mrs. Hartwell. I have never stolen anything in my life." Catherine's face hardened further at this denial, as if Miriam's refusal to confess was itself an additional offense, proof of dishonesty rather than innocence. "The necklace is worth over $50,000, Richard said, his lawyer voice activated, calm and measured and threatening. "This is not a minor matter, Miriam. This is grand larceny. This is a felony. If you took it, you need to tell us now. Return it, and we might be willing to handle this privately without involving the police. But if you continue to deny it and we have to pursue this officially, the consequences will be much more severe." Miriam's mind raced, trying to understand what was happening, trying to remember the last time she had even seen the sapphire necklace, trying to recall if she had noticed anything unusual in the master bedroom, trying to make sense of how she had suddenly become a thief in the eyes of people she had served faithfully for 6 years. "I didn't take it," she repeated, hearing the desperation in her own voice, hating how weak she sounded, how powerless. "Maybe it was moved somewhere else. Maybe someone else was in the house. I would never steal from you, from this family. You have to believe me." But Catherine was shaking her head, impatient with these protestations, already having decided Miriam's guilt, already having constructed a narrative that made sense to her, that protected her from having to question her own judgment, her own trust, her own security. "You're the only one with access," Catherine said again, as if repetition made it true, as if saying it enough times would transform suspicion into fact. "The safe wasn't broken into, nothing else is missing, and you're the only person who could have done this. I want to search your room. Now." The search was humiliating. Catherine and Richard following Miriam up to the 3rd floor, standing in her small private space while she opened drawers in her closet and her suitcase, showing them her meager possessions, the few clothes and personal items that constituted everything she owned in America, the small box where she kept letters from home and photos of her family, the Bible her mother had given her before she left the Philippines. Catherine went through everything with cold efficiency, unfolding clothes, opening boxes, checking pockets, looking under the mattress, searching with the assumption of guilt, with the belief that the necklace must be there somewhere, that Miriam was simply a good liar, a clever thief who had hidden her crime well. They found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find, and Miriam stood there watching this invasion with tears streaming down her face, unable to protest, unable to stop them, understanding that she had no rights here, that her privacy meant nothing, that her dignity could be stripped away without recourse because she was the help, because she was vulnerable, because she was expendable. When the search concluded without discovering the necklace, Catherine looked not relieved, but frustrated, angry that her theory had not been confirmed, angry that the situation remained unresolved, angry at Miriam for not confessing, for not making this easier, for not fulfilling the role of guilty party that Catherine had already assigned her. "We're giving you 24 hours to return the necklace," Richard said, as they descended the stairs, his tone making clear this was not a negotiation, but an ultimatum. "Bring it back, leave it somewhere in the house, and we'll consider this matter closed. But if you don't, if the necklace doesn't reappear, we're calling the police tomorrow and filing charges. We'll also be contacting immigration services, since I assume your visa status is tied to your employment. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Miriam understood perfectly, understood she was being threatened not just with criminal charges, but with deportation, with the destruction of not just her life, but her family's life, with the collapse of everything she had built over years of sacrifice and labor. "I didn't take it," she said again, voice breaking, hating how weak she sounded, how powerless. "I can't return what I didn't take. Please, you have to believe me. I have worked for you for 6 years. I have cared for your children. I have never done anything dishonest, never taken even $1, never betrayed your trust. Why would I suddenly steal from you now?" But her logic had no power here. Her history of faithful service counted for nothing. Her obvious distress was interpreted as the anxiety of guilt rather than the anguish of injustice, and Catherine cut her off with a sharp gesture. "I think you should pack your things and leave tonight. I don't want you in this house anymore. I don't trust you around my children. I'll pay you through the end of the week, but I want you gone within the hour." The dismissal was devastating, not just practically, but existentially. The loss of job and housing and income, hating Miriam simultaneously. But worse was the accusation itself, the mark this placed on her, the permanent stain of suspicion that would follow her regardless of whether charges were filed. She packed quickly, stuffing her few belongings into her suitcase with shaking hands, crying so hard she could barely see what she was doing, her mind racing with panic about where she would go, how she would survive, what she would tell her family who depended on her income, how she would explain this disaster that had appeared from nowhere and destroyed everything. She tried one more time as she was leaving, standing in the foyer with her suitcase, Catherine watching coldly from the living room doorway. "Please, Mrs. Hartwell, I'm begging you. I didn't take your necklace. Don't do this to me. Don't destroy my life over something I didn't do." But Catherine's face showed no compassion, no doubt, no willingness to reconsider. "Just go, Miriam," she said, voice tired now, as if this whole situation was exhausting rather than catastrophic. "If you didn't take it, then I'm sure that will be established when the police investigate. But I can't have you here anymore. I need to protect my family." The irony of this statement, that Catherine was protecting her family from the woman who had helped raise their children, who had sacrificed her own life to make their lives more comfortable, who had loved them despite having every reason not to, was lost on Catherine entirely. And Miriam finally understood that there was no reaching these people, no appealing to their better nature, no justice to be found here. Miriam called her cousin from a diner near the train station, crying so hard she could barely explain what had happened. And her cousin picked her up and brought her back to Queens, back to the small apartment where she had lived years earlier, finding her a couch to sleep on, holding her while she wept, offering comfort that could not possibly ease the magnitude of this loss. The police did come 2 days later, finding Miriam at her cousin's apartment because the Hartwells had provided her previous address, and they questioned her about the theft, about her access to the bedroom, about her financial situation, about whether she had sold the necklace or still had it in her possession. Miriam answered truthfully, repeating over and over that she had not taken anything, that she was innocent, that she had no idea what had happened to the necklace. The officers were not unkind, but they were skeptical, operating from the same assumption as the Hartwells, that Miriam's position in the household made her the obvious suspect, that her need for money provided motive, that her denial was likely self-serving rather than honest. They searched her cousin's apartment with permission because Miriam was too frightened to refuse, too aware of her precarious immigration status to assert rights she was not sure she possessed. And again, they found nothing because there was nothing to find. The investigation continued for weeks, Miriam's life suspended in terrible uncertainty, unable to work because no one would hire someone under investigation for theft, unable to send money home, unable to explain to her family what was happening, withdrawing into depression and anxiety that left her barely functional, barely able to eat or sleep, haunted by nightmares and the constant fear of arrest, of prosecution, of being labeled a thief forever, regardless of her innocence. The Hartwells, meanwhile, filed an insurance claim for the missing necklace. Catherine talking to friends about the betrayal, about how terrible it was that you could not trust anyone anymore, about the danger of bringing strangers into your home, painting herself as the victim in this story, garnering sympathy and support while Miriam's name and reputation were destroyed behind her back. Emma, Jacob, and Sophie asked about Miriam, confused by her sudden absence, and Catherine told them a version of the truth that positioned Miriam as the villain, explaining that Miriam had taken something that did not belong to her, that they had to let her go, that trust once broken could not be repaired. The children accepted this explanation with the easy moral clarity of youth, not questioning, not thinking critically about someone who had cared for them for years, simply absorbing their mother's narrative and moving on. Another nanny hired within 2 weeks. a younger woman from Guatemala who smiled a lot and kept her head down and learned quickly not to question anything, not to get too attached, not to think this family would protect her if problems arose. 4 months after Miriam's dismissal, the police investigation stalled and was eventually dropped, the district attorney declining to prosecute because there was no physical evidence, no witnesses, no confession, nothing but circumstantial suspicion that would not hold up in court. Miriam should have felt relief when her cousin's lawyer called with this news, but she felt only emptiness, the absence of immediate threat, but not the presence of vindication, not the restoration of her reputation, not the return of the life that had been taken from her. She was not exonerated, just not prosecuted, and that distinction mattered immensely, meant that doubt would always follow her, that potential employers who checked references would hear about the accusation, about the missing necklace, about the fact that while charges were never filed, the matter was never resolved, the necklace never found, suspicion never definitively removed. She applied for dozens of jobs and was rejected from all of them, either explicitly told that the theft allegation made her unhireable, or simply never called back after initial interviews that seemed promising. Her savings evaporated quickly, her ability to send money home ended, and the phone calls with her family became increasingly painful, her mother's voice full of confusion and worry, her siblings having to drop out of school or defer their education, her father's health declining without access to proper medication, everything Miriam had built over years collapsing in months. The dream not just deferred, but destroyed. She found work eventually through a community organization, cash-only cleaning jobs where employers did not check references, did not ask questions, paid under the table for services rendered, and expected perfection without complaint. The work was even harder than before and paid even less. No benefits, no security, no path forward, just survival, just scraping by day to day. And Miriam felt her spirit breaking under the weight of injustice, felt herself becoming bitter in ways she had never been before, felt anger growing where there had only been resignation, felt her faith in goodness and fairness and the basic decency of human beings eroding day by day. She stopped going to church, unable to sit through sermons about God's justice and protection when her own experience testified so loudly to the absence of both, unable to pray to a God who had apparently abandoned her to this fate, unable to maintain hope when every day brought new evidence that the world was cruel and arbitrary and punished the innocent while rewarding the guilty. Her cousin worried about her, seeing the light dim in Miriam's eyes, seeing her withdrawn to herself, seeing depression settle over her like a heavy blanket. But there was little anyone could do, no fix for the fundamental injustice that had upended Miriam's life, no way to undo what had been done or restore what had been taken from her. 3 years passed like this, Miriam aging rapidly under the stress and hardship, her health declining from the combination of poverty and depression, and the physical toll of relentless labor without adequate nutrition or rest, her hope for the future completely extinguished, her days blending into an endless gray struggle without meaning or purpose beyond the basic animal drive to survive. She had given up on clearing her name, given up on finding justice, given up on rebuilding the life that she had lost, accepting instead this diminished existence, this punishment for a crime she had not committed, this permanent exile from the modest but stable life she had worked so hard to build. She thought often of the Hartwells, wondered if they ever thought of her, if Catherine ever had a moment of doubt about Miriam's guilt, if Richard ever questioned whether they had destroyed an innocent woman's life, if the children ever asked what happened to Auntie Miriam, if that family ever faced any consequence for what they had done. She assumed the answer was no, assumed they had moved on completely, the missing necklace just an annoyance, Miriam herself forgotten as soon as the next nanny arrived, the whole incident filed away as a minor drama in their otherwise charmed existence. No lasting impact, no lesson learned, no justice delivered.
But consequence has its own timeline, indifferent to human impatience, arriving when it arrives, often when least expected, often in forms that surprise everyone involved, and the wheel of karma, if you believe in such things, turns at its own pace, grinding slowly but grinding fine, ensuring eventually that all accounts are balanced, all debts paid, all wrongs answered, even if the answer takes years to arrive. The revelation came not through Miriam's efforts, for she had no resources to investigate, no power to demand truth, no access to the family that had cast her out. It came instead through pure accident, through a combination of circumstances that no one could have predicted or engineered, through the kind of coincidence that makes you wonder if perhaps there is some organizing principle to the universe after all, some force that bends toward justice even when justice seems impossible. Emma Hartwell, now 17 years old and preparing for college, was cleaning out her closet one weekend, sorting through years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to keep and what to donate or throw away, when she found a box pushed to the back corner of her top shelf, a box she had forgotten completely, a box from her middle school years when she had been going through a phase of collecting shiny objects, of secreting away anything that caught her eye, of building a small private hoard of treasures that made her feel secure in ways she could not have articulated at the time. She opened the box and found the usual collection of childhood ephemera, ticket stub, photographs, and notes from friends, and cheap jewelry from Claire's. But there, at the bottom, wrapped in an old sock, was her grandmother's sapphire necklace, the one that had been missing for 3 years, the one that had cost Miriam her job and her reputation and her future. She stared at it in shock, memory flooding back, remembering now that she had taken it years ago, trying it on in her mother's room when no one was home, thinking it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, deciding on impulse to keep it for herself, to hide it away, experiencing the thrill and guilt that came from doing something forbidden, from taking what was not hers. She had hidden it in her secret box and then had forgotten about it, moved on to other interests, other phases, the necklace buried under accumulating layers of her teenage life, emerging now like an accusation, like evidence of a crime she had committed and let someone else be punished for, like proof that she had destroyed a woman's life through childish selfishness and then simply forgotten, moved on, lived her comfortable life while Miriam suffered for her theft. Emma sat on her bedroom floor holding the necklace, 14 years old when she took it, 17 now, old enough to understand fully what she had done, old enough to comprehend the magnitude of consequences, old enough to feel the weight of moral responsibility settling on her shoulders like chains. She should take it to her mother immediately, should confess what she had done, should tell the truth, and face whatever consequences followed, but fear paralyzed her. Fear of her mother's anger, fear of being punished, fear of how this would change the way her parents saw her, fear of losing the college applications and future plans and life trajectory that could be derailed by this revelation. She sat there for hours, holding the necklace, crying, wrestling with conscience and cowardice, and finally she did what many people do when facing uncomfortable truth. She tried to make it disappear, tried to fix things without accepting blame, tried to address consequences without confronting cause. She wrapped the necklace back in the sock, put it in her backpack, and left the house, telling her mother she was going to the library. But instead, she drove to a neighborhood she barely knew, working-class area where she thought no one would recognize her, and she walked until she found a church. And she left the necklace in the donation box outside with a note that said simply, "Please give this to someone who needs it." It was a coward solution, an attempt to alleviate guilt without actually making amends, to dispose of evidence without addressing the harm caused. And Emma told herself it was enough that she had done the right thing in getting rid of the stolen item, that dwelling on the past would not help anyone, that Miriam had probably moved on and found another job and was fine, that sometimes you just had to let things go and move forward. She returned home and threw away the box and the sock and tried to forget again, tried to push the memory back down where it had been buried, but it would not stay buried. It kept surfacing, kept intruding into her thoughts, kept making her feel sick with guilt and shame, kept reminding her that she had let an innocent person be destroyed and had done nothing, said nothing, allowed injustice to persist because confronting it was too uncomfortable, too risky, too demanding of courage she did not possess. She became withdrawn over the following weeks, her grades slipping,
her mood darkening, her parents noticing but attributing it to stress about college applications, about normal teenage angst, never suspecting that their daughter was being eaten alive by guilt over a crime they had forgotten about, a crime whose victim they never thought about, a wrong they considered settled and past. The necklace did end up at the church's weekly outreach program, and a volunteer named Sarah John, no relation to Miriam, but coincidentally sharing her last name, noticed it while sorting donations, recognized immediately that this was not costume jewelry, but something valuable, something expensive that didn't belong in a donation box, something that was probably stolen or lost and should be reported. Sarah took the necklace to the police, explaining where she had found it, and the police ran the serial number that was engraved on the clasp because valuable jewelry is usually cataloged and registered. And the number came back registered to Catherine Hartwell, reported stolen 3 years earlier, case closed due to insufficient evidence, but never solved, never resolved. The police contacted Catherine, who came to the station to identify and reclaim the necklace, and she stood there staring at it in shock and confusion, trying to understand how it had ended up in a church donation box, trying to make sense of a mystery that was supposedly solved, that supposedly had a culprit, that supposedly had been about Miriam John's theft, even though no evidence had ever been found, even though Miriam had been let go based purely on suspicion and opportunity. The detective handling the case, a woman named Rodriguez, who had not been involved in the original investigation, asked Catherine if she had any idea how the necklace might have ended up where it was found. And Catherine said no, said she was just grateful to have it back, said the whole thing was very strange. And the detective asked if Catherine was certain that Miriam John had taken it, if there was any possibility that someone else in the household might have moved it, might have had access to it, might have taken it and only now returned it through this anonymous donation. Catherine felt something cold settle in her stomach at this question, felt doubt crack through the certainty she had maintained for 3 years, felt the possibility opening up that she had been wrong, terribly wrong, catastrophically wrong. And she told the detective that she was certain that it had to have been Miriam, but her voice lacked conviction now, and the detective heard that lack and pushed gently, explaining that the location where the necklace was found suggested it had been held by someone local, someone who knew the area, someone who had kept it for years before deciding to get rid of it. And that profile did not match Miriam John, who had left the area immediately after being dismissed, who had no reason to hold on to stolen jewelry for years before anonymously donating it. Is it possible, Detective Rodriguez asked carefully, that one of your children might have taken it, perhaps not understanding its value, perhaps as a childish impulse, perhaps forgetting about it until recently? Catherine's first instinct was to reject this possibility completely, to defend her children from any suggestion of wrongdoing. But even as she opened her mouth to protest, memory surfaced. Emma going through a phase around that time of collecting shiny things, of hiding objects in her room, of being secretive and anxious in ways Catherine had attributed to normal adolescent development. Emma, who had been 13 when the necklace went missing, young enough to make impulsive mistakes, old enough to be frightened of consequences, exactly the age where theft might be impulse and concealment might be panic. Catherine went home without answering the detective's question definitively, her mind racing, and she went directly to Emma's room where her daughter was sitting at her desk doing homework, and she sat down on the bed and asked directly, without preamble, if Emma had taken the necklace 3 years ago. Emma's face went white, absolute terror flooding her features, and in that moment, before she could construct a lie or a defense, Catherine knew with complete certainty that her daughter had taken it, that Miriam had been innocent, that the family had destroyed a woman's life based on false accusation, on assumption, on prejudice disguised as logical deduction. "Tell me the truth," Catherine said, her voice shaking, and Emma broke down completely, sobbing, confessing everything, explaining that she had taken it to try it on, had hidden it meaning to return it, had forgotten about it, had found it recently and panicked and donated it, had known for weeks now that Miriam had been innocent, had been carrying this guilt, but had been too afraid to speak up, too afraid of consequences, too cowardly to do the right thing, even knowing an innocent woman had suffered for her crime. Catherine sat there listening to her daughter's confession and felt the ground shift beneath her, felt her understanding of the past 3 years reorganize around this new information, felt guilt and horror and shame wash over her in waves that left her struggling to breathe. She had been so certain, so convinced of Miriam's guilt, so quick to accuse and so resistant to doubt. And that certainty had seemed like strength, like decisiveness, like protecting her family. But now it revealed itself as arrogance, as prejudice, as the casual cruelty of someone who had never had to consider that she might be wrong, because being wrong had never cost her anything. She thought of Miriam's face that day, the tears, the desperate denials, the begging. And Catherine had seen all of that as manipulation, as the performance of an accused thief trying to avoid consequences. But now she understood it had been genuine, had been the reaction of an innocent person watching their life be destroyed, watching people she had served faithfully turn against them without evidence, without investigation, without the basic decency of believing her when she said she had done nothing wrong. Catherine told Richard that night, the two of them sitting in their bedroom, and Richard's first reaction was to minimize, to say mistakes happen, to suggest they simply move on now, that the necklace had been recovered, to frame the whole thing as an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a grave injustice they had perpetrated. But Catherine could not accept that framing, could not let herself off that easily, understood now that what they had done to Miriam was not a mistake, but a choice, a series of choices to assume guilt, to refuse belief, to prioritize their own comfort and certainty over Miriam's life and dignity and future. "We have to find her," Catherine said, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "We have to tell her the truth. We have to apologize. We have to make this right." Richard resisted initially, lawyer instincts activated, warning about liability, about admitting fault, about opening themselves to lawsuits, about protecting the family's interests. But Catherine cut him off sharply. "We destroyed that woman's life," she said, voice rising. "We accused her of a crime she didn't commit. We fired her. We had her investigated by police. We ruined her reputation. We took away her income and her housing, and probably her immigration status. And we did all of that based on nothing, based on our assumption that she must be guilty because she was the help, because she was vulnerable, because we could. And then we moved on with our lives like it didn't matter, like she didn't matter, like destroying someone was just an inconvenience rather than a grave injustice they had perpetrated. So yes, we're going to find her, and yes, we're going to tell her the truth, and yes, we're going to do whatever it takes to make amends. And I don't care about liability or lawsuits or any of that, because we deserve whatever consequences come from this." Finding Miriam proved difficult because she had no permanent address, no stable employment, no digital footprint that made her easy to locate. But Catherine hired a private investigator who specialized in finding people, and after 2 weeks of searching, he located Miriam living in a basement apartment in the Bronx, working multiple cleaning jobs, barely surviving, visibly aged beyond her years, her health clearly suffering, her spirit clearly broken. Catherine called the number the investigator provided, and when Miriam answered, Catherine said simply, "This is Catherine Hartwell. We found the necklace. You didn't take it. I need to see you. I need to apologize. Please." There was a long silence on the line, so long Catherine thought Miriam had hung up. And then Miriam's voice, cold and flat in a way Catherine had never heard before, said, "Why? What difference does it make now? You already destroyed me. You already took everything. An apology changes nothing. Catherine felt the words like blows, but pressed on. You're right. An apology isn't enough. Nothing I can say or do will be enough, but I need to try. I need you to know the truth. I need to tell you what really happened. Please, Miriam, please give me a chance to at least try to make this right. They met at a diner near Miriam's apartment, neutral ground, public space where Miriam could leave whenever she wanted, where she would not be trapped or vulnerable. Catherine arrived early, nervous in ways she had not been nervous in years, and when Miriam walked in, Catherine barely recognized her. The woman who had worked for her family had been slim but healthy, had moved with quiet efficiency, had gentle eyes and a ready smile despite her exhaustion. The woman walking toward her now was gaunt, almost skeletal, moved with the careful gait of someone whose body hurt constantly, had eyes that were dead, empty of anything resembling warmth or hope or trust. They sat across from each other in silence for a long moment, Catherine not knowing how to begin, Miriam waiting with the patience of someone who had learned to expect nothing good, who had learned that hope was just another way to be hurt. Finally, Catherine spoke, and she told the whole truth about finding the necklace, about Emma's confession, about how wrong they had been, about how sorry she was, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and remorse and desperate need for forgiveness that Catherine knew she had no right to request. Miriam listened without expression, and when Catherine finished, she was quiet for a long time before speaking. "Do you know what you did to me?" Miriam finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying such weight that Catherine felt physically pressed back in her seat. "I lost everything. My job, my home, my reputation, my ability to work in my field. I couldn't send money home anymore, so my brother had to drop out of school. My sister couldn't finish her education. My father died because we couldn't afford his medications. My mother had a stroke from the stress and is partially paralyzed now. I lost 3 years of my life, Mrs. Hartwell. 3 years of barely surviving, of being treated like a criminal everywhere I went, of being afraid every day that I would be arrested or deported, of having no hope, no future, nothing but trying to get through each day without completely giving up. I thought about killing myself, Mrs. Hartwell, multiple times. I thought about how much easier it would be to just stop existing, to stop carrying this weight, to stop being punished for something I didn't do. The only reason I'm still alive is because I'm Catholic, and I'm afraid of hell. And I thought hell couldn't be worse than what I was already living."
Through. That's what you did to me. That's what your accusation cost. And you want to apologize? You want to make it right? How? How do you make this right? Catherine had no answer because there was no answer, because Miriam was right that this could not be made right, that the harm was done and could not be undone, that 3 years of suffering and loss and destruction could not be erased by confession or apology or any amount of money. But Catherine tried anyway because she had to try, because doing nothing was unconscionable, even if doing something was inadequate. She offered money first, a substantial sum, 6 figures, enough to maybe help Miriam rebuild, to send money to her family, to get medical care, to have security and options. Miriam looked at the number written on the check Catherine slid across the table and felt nothing. No gratitude, no relief, just the bitter understanding that this was guilt money, conscience money, the price Catherine was willing to pay to feel better about herself, to assuage the discomfort of knowing she had destroyed someone. "This doesn't fix anything," Miriam said. But she took the check anyway because she was poor and practical and knew that refusing it would only hurt herself, would only be pride she could not afford. But taking it felt like defeat somehow, like accepting payment for her suffering, like agreeing that money could balance accounts that could never truly be balanced. Catherine also offered to write letters of recommendation, to call employers, to help Miriam find work, to personally vouch for her character and honesty, to do whatever she could to help repair the reputation she had destroyed.
She offered to write to Miriam's family to help with her mother's medical care, to fund her siblings' education, to try to restore some of what had been lost, knowing even as she made these offers that they were inadequate, that nothing could truly restore what had been taken, that some damage was permanent, no matter how much money or effort was thrown at trying to fix it. Miriam accepted some of these offers, not because she forgave Catherine, but because she needed them, because her survival and her family's survival required her to swallow pride and accept help even from the person who had destroyed her. And that necessity was its own kind of bitterness, its own reminder that power dynamics remained unchanged, that Catherine still had everything while Miriam had nothing, that Catherine's ability to help was itself evidence of the disparity that had made the original injustice possible. The meeting ended with no reconciliation, no healing moment, no forgiveness granted, because forgiveness was not something Miriam could give or Catherine could earn, just a transaction, an exchange of information and resources that changed some practical circumstances, but nothing fundamental about their relationship or the harm that had been done. Catherine left the diner feeling worse than when she had arrived, understanding now that there was no redemption available here, no way to fix this and move on feeling good about herself, that she would carry this guilt for the rest of her life and should carry it, that it was appropriate punishment for what she had done, even though it was nothing compared to what Miriam had suffered. She told Richard that night that they were going to do everything possible to help Miriam, that they were going to fund her mother's care and her siblings' education, that they were going to make sure Miriam had resources and references and support to rebuild her life. And Richard agreed, though he worried about legal implications, about whether helping now was an admission of liability, about protecting themselves even as they tried to help the person they had harmed. Catherine overrode his concerns, operating now from something other than self-interest, from some late-arriving moral clarity that demanded action regardless of risk or cost to herself. Emma had to face Miriam too, Catherine insisting on this, understanding that her daughter needed to confront what her actions had caused, needed to see the human cost of her selfishness and cowardice, needed to carry this lesson forward into her adult life so she would never again allow someone else to suffer for her mistakes. The meeting was brief and excruciating. Emma barely able to look at Miriam, stammering through an apology that felt childish and inadequate. And Miriam listening with a face like stone, offering no comfort, no easy forgiveness, no absolution for the girl whose impulse theft had destroyed her life. "You need to understand something," Miriam said to Emma, her voice hard. "You're going to go to college and have a career and get married and have children and live a full life. And every good thing that happens to you, every opportunity you get, every moment of happiness will be built partly on my suffering, on the 3 years you stole from me, on the future you cost me, on the damage you caused that can never be fully repaired. You'll carry that knowledge, or you won't, but either way, it will be true. That's what it means to harm someone and escape consequences. You get to move on while they remain trapped in the aftermath. So I hope you use your privilege well. I hope you become someone worth the cost I paid. Because if you don't, if you waste these opportunities, if you live a mediocre, selfish life after what you did, then my suffering will have meant nothing, will have been purely waste, purely loss, and that would be worse than anything else." The words haunted Emma, changed her in ways that therapy and her parents' lectures never could, planted in her a sense of moral obligation that shaped her choices going forward, her decision to study social work, her commitment to helping vulnerable populations, her lifelong work advocating for domestic workers' rights and protections, her transformation from a privileged girl who had destroyed someone through carelessness into a woman who spent her life trying to prevent others from being similarly destroyed. It was not redemption, exactly, because redemption required the victim's forgiveness, and Miriam never forgave, never softened, never offered Emma the grace that might have eased her guilt. But it was transformation. It was growth. It was the kind of change that comes from being forced to see the consequences of your actions, from being denied the comfort of easy forgiveness, from having to carry weight that changed how you move through the world. Miriam used Catherine's money to get proper medical care, to send money home for her mother's treatment and her siblings' education, to move into a better apartment, to take time to recover physically and emotionally from years of grinding poverty and stress. She went back to school, using the connections Catherine provided to get into a nursing program, reclaiming the career she had been trained for, rebuilding her professional life with Catherine's letters of recommendation, smoothing the way, explaining the gap in her employment history, vouching for her character in ways that actually meant something because they came from wealth and whiteness and carried weight that Miriam's own protestations of innocence never had. She graduated and found work at a hospital, a good job with benefits and reasonable hours and respect, and her life stabilized in ways that it had not been stable since before the accusation. And she was grateful for this, grateful for the material improvement, grateful for the opportunity to send money home again, to support her family, to rebuild what had been broken. But gratitude was complicated by resentment, by the knowledge that all of this was only possible because Catherine decided to help, because Catherine's guilt motivated action in ways Miriam's innocence never had, because the system that had destroyed Miriam based on accusation was the same system that rebuilt her based on Catherine's endorsement, because her fate had always been in others' hands, dependent on others' choices, vulnerable to others' decisions, never truly autonomous, never truly secure. Miriam worked hard at her nursing job, was good at it, found satisfaction in helping patients and using her skills to ease suffering, to provide care. But she was changed by what happened to her. Harder, more cynical, less willing to trust, less able to love work or people without reservation, always maintaining distance, always protecting herself, always aware that everything could be taken away again on someone's whim, on someone's false accusation, on the fundamental vulnerability of being working class and immigrant and female in a world designed to protect people like the Hartwells while sacrificing people like her. The Hartwells' life changed too, though not in ways visible to outsiders, not in ways that involved actual suffering or material loss. They remained wealthy, comfortable, successful by every external measure, but something had broken in their family. Some illusion of moral superiority, some belief that they were good people who would never do serious harm. Catherine became involved in immigrant rights organizations and domestic workers' advocacy, trying to channel her guilt into action, trying to make systemic change that might prevent other Miriams from being similarly destroyed. But she was always aware that this activism was partly selfish, partly about managing her own guilt, partly about redemption she had not earned and probably did not deserve. Richard withdrew, uncomfortable with the whole situation, preferring not to think about it, to focus on work and move on. And this difference in how they processed the guilt created distance in their marriage that never fully closed. Catherine unable to respect Richard's desire to forget, Richard unable to understand Catherine's need to continually revisit and atone. Jacob and Sophie, younger when Miriam worked for them, barely remembered her, moved on quickly when the new nanny arrived, their lives unchanged by Miriam's destruction because children are resilient and selfish and their worlds are small. But Emma carried it forever, the weight of what she had done, the knowledge of the harm she had caused, and it shaped her into someone better than she might otherwise have become, someone more conscious of power and privilege, someone more careful about the impact of her choices, someone who spent her life trying to balance accounts that could never be balanced, trying to help people she could never fully help because she could never undo what had been done to Miriam. She and Miriam had no ongoing relationship, Miriam making clear she wanted nothing to do with any of them beyond the practical support Catherine provided, wanting no emotional connection, no forgiveness narrative, no reconciliation story that would make the Hartwells feel better about themselves. Emma had to live with that rejection, that refusal, that absence of closure, and it was appropriate. It was what she deserved. It was the consequence she would carry forever for a childish impulse that had destroyed someone's life. Years passed, Miriam establishing herself as an excellent nurse, respected by colleagues and beloved by patients, building a life that was stable if not happy, functional if not joyful, marked permanently by the injustice she had suffered, by the years she had lost, by the trust that had been broken and could never be fully restored. She never married, never had children, never quite let anyone get close enough to hurt her again. And this isolation was its own tragedy, its own loss, another cost extracted by the Hartwell's false accusation and her years of suffering in its aftermath. She sent money home faithfully, supported her mother and siblings, took satisfaction in knowing that her sacrifice had enabled them to have better lives, education, opportunities, futures that might break the cycle of poverty that had defined generations. But she also resented the cost, resented that her life had been consumed by obligation, that she had never gotten to live for herself, that everything had been taken from her, first by circumstance and poverty, then by false accusation and injustice, leaving nothing, creating a life that was service and duty and survival, but not ever really hers, not ever really free. Catherine thought about Miriam often, even years later, the guilt never fully fading, the knowledge of what she had done never becoming comfortable or distant, and she tried to honor that discomfort, tried to use it as motivation to be better, to do better, to fight for systems and protections that would make it harder for people like her to destroy people like Miriam. But she also knew that her ability to do this work, to be an activist and advocate, was itself a privilege. Was itself enabled by the wealth and comfort she had maintained while Miriam suffered. And that irony was inescapable. That contradiction was permanent. She established a scholarship fund in Miriam's name for immigrant women pursuing nursing degrees, channeled significant money into it, made sure Miriam knew about it, though Miriam's reaction was muted, grateful for the practical help it would provide to others, but unmoved emotionally, unwilling to give Catherine credit for doing the bare minimum, for using her wealth to try to purchase redemption that could not be bought. The story became known in their community eventually, whispered about, Catherine having told friends in moments of honesty what had happened, the truth spreading despite the family's desire for privacy, and the Hartwells faced some social consequences, some people cutting them off, others treating them differently, their reputation damaged, though never destroyed the way Miriam's had been destroyed, their lives disrupted but never ruined the way Miriam's had been ruined. They had the resources and connections and social capital to weather this storm, to rebuild their reputation through time and good works, and the simple fact that wealth protects itself, that rich people are allowed to make mistakes and recover, while poor people are allowed no mistakes, no recovery, no second chances. This disparity was visible to everyone watching the situation, this confirmation that the world operated by different rules for different people, that justice was not blind, but acutely aware of who had power and who did not, who deserved protection and who could be sacrificed, who mattered and who did not. Miriam lived to be 68, dying of a heart attack while at work, collapsing in a hospital hallway while helping a patient. And her death was sudden and perhaps merciful. Perhaps a release from a life that had been more burden than gift, more obligation than joy, more survival than living. Her siblings came from the Philippines for the funeral, these educated, successful people whose opportunities had been purchased by their sister's sacrifice. And they spoke about Miriam with love and gratitude, about how she had given them everything, how she had never complained, how she had carried the family on her back across oceans and years, how they owed her more than they could ever repay. Catherine came to the funeral, uninvited, but feeling she should be there, should bear witness, and she sat in the back and wept. And some people who knew the story glared at her, resented her presence, felt she had no right to mourn the woman she had destroyed. And they were not wrong. She did not have that right, but she came anyway, because she needed to, because Miriam had been part of her life even in absence, had haunted her conscience for decades, had been the ghost at every family dinner, the shadow over every happy moment, the reminder that her comfort was built partly on injustice, that her family's peace had come at the cost of Miriam's destruction. Emma came too, now a social worker in her 30s, married with children of her own, carrying still the weight of what she had done as a thoughtless child, trying still to balance accounts that could not be balanced, to atone for sins that could not be forgiven. She approached Miriam's siblings after the service and introduced herself and apologized, not expecting absolution, but needing to speak truth. And Miriam's brother looked at her with cold eyes and said simply, "Our sister never forgave you." She spoke of what happened rarely, but when she did, there was pain that never healed, damage you caused that followed her every day of her life. You should know that. You should carry that. Not to punish you, but so you understand what your actions cost, what your family's accusations cost, and what it means to be vulnerable in a world that does not protect the vulnerable. Emma nodded, tears streaming, and thanked him for his honesty and left the funeral knowing she would carry this forever, that it was right that she should carry it, that some things should not be forgotten or forgiven or set aside, that bearing witness to harm was sometimes the only honor available, the only way to prevent that harm from being erased, normalized, forgotten. The Hartwells lived on, Richard dying of cancer at 72, Catherine living into her 80s, Emma building a career helping people, Jacob and Sophie living their lives largely untouched by the family's one moment of moral failure, the machine of privilege protecting them, cushioning them, ensuring that consequences remained limited, contained, never truly threatening their fundamental security or status. Catherine gave away much of her wealth before she died, funding organizations that helped domestic workers and immigrants, trying to do penance, trying to balance accounts, knowing that it wasn't adequate, but doing it anyway because doing nothing was worse. And in her final years, she spoke about Miriam often, telling the story to anyone who would listen, using her own shame as a teaching tool, as a warning about the dangers of prejudice and assumption, about the ease with which we destroy others when we have power and they do not, about the importance of belief, of investigation, of treating people with dignity regardless of their position or vulnerability. But even in these tellings, even in Catherine's attempts at honesty and moral instruction, the story became partly about Catherine, about her growth, about her learning, about her journey from ignorance to awareness, centering herself in a narrative that should have centered Miriam, making even her guilt somehow about her rather than about the woman she had harmed. And this centering was itself a kind of privilege, a kind of theft, taking even the story of injustice and making it a story of personal growth, of redemption, of learning and becoming better, erasing once again the woman who had actually suffered, who had actually lost, who had actually paid the price for others' mistakes and received nothing in return but pain and permanent damage and a life that never became what it should have been. Miriam John was buried in a cemetery in Queens, her grave marked with a simple stone bearing her name and dates, and a phrase in Tagalog that translated to, "She carried us all." And her family visited when they could, maintaining the grave, bringing flowers, telling their children about
the aunt who had sacrificed everything so they could have better lives, trying to keep her memory alive though memory fades and generations move on, and eventually everyone who knew her would be gone too, and she would exist only as a name on stone, a cautionary tale in the Hartwell family, a case study in social work classes taught by Emma, a reminder that should not need to be given but always does, that the vulnerable need protection, that accusations require evidence, that destroying someone is easy when you have power and they do not, that injustice is everywhere and constant and only prevented by active choice, by conscious effort, by people deciding to be better than comes naturally, to resist the easy assumptions, to question their own certainty, to recognize their capacity for harm and choose differently despite the cost. And so the story ends as it began, with truth settling in the bones of those who have suffered injustice, with knowledge that cannot be extracted or undone, with the weight of harm that persists long after apologies have been offered and money has changed hands and the perpetrators have moved on with their lives. Miriam John lived and died carrying that weight, and her life stands as testament to a simple, brutal reality that good people can do terrible things when systems of power and privilege make it easy,
that innocence provides no protection against accusation when the accused is vulnerable, that justice is not a given but a choice that must be made again and again, and that sometimes, often, it is not made, and people suffer, and life goes on, and the only thing that remains is the story, told and retold, hoping that someone listening will hear, will understand, will choose differently when their moment comes, will break the cycle rather than perpetuate it, will protect rather than destroy, will believe rather than accuse, will see the humanity in those who serve them and treat them accordingly, with dignity, with respect, with the recognition that we are all human, all vulnerable, all deserving of basic fairness and basic justice and basic belief when we say we have done nothing wrong. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, and comment.